Thanks for joining us today for the Cyber Insight series. This is our second interview since we've begun. And one of the things that you probably heard me talk about if you've taken my classes is how cyber has evolved from an IT issue into a business issue, and how cybersecurity has changed tremendously over the past several years. And today's interviewee is going to be talking to us about her experiences in cybersecurity from the very forefront, Gail Walters, and I'll spotlight her in just a second. So just to introduce Gail, she is the America's head of UBS's Group Chief Information Security Office, which is based in the New York area. And she's been with UBS for over 14 years, holding many different roles in cybersecurity, including CISO, operational resilience, cybercrime intelligence and investigation, and IT risk and security. Prior to being at UBS, Gail was at Citigroup for about 14 years, where she started in IT Audit as an ethical hacker, attempting to breach system security and then recommending different defensive controls. After that, Gail joined the fraud investigations team with her favorite role of all time, investigating cybercrime and working with law enforcement to put away the bad guys. Since then, she's joined as CISO and several other roles, including the head of the cyber incident response team. So everyone, please give a hearty welcome to Gail, and I'm going to turn off the spotlight and spotlight Gail.
Hi, everyone.
Morning, Gail.
There we go.
Morning.
Morning.
Is it spotlighting Gail?
No.
No. Spotlighting,
No.
spotlighting Lynn. Sorry, Lynn. Okay, there we go. We're spotlighting Gail now. Gail, thank you so much for joining us this morning and showing us your wonderful dragon, Marty. She's an amazing dragon. If you guys were not on the call in the first few minutes, he's adorable. So I'm going to kick it off and talk a little bit about what got you interested in cybersecurity.
So when I started working, I was a programmer. And I had access to lots of different systems, development systems for our various different clients. I was at a consulting firm. And then I left that firm because they started to do things that I didn't find ethical. I was very young, and that was my first introduction to somebody asking me to lie about something on my timesheets. And then when I left, I took a couple of months off just to think about what I wanted to do with my life. And the people who took my spot kept asking me what were the passwords to the systems I was working on, because they needed the passwords. So I started to think, and my dad was in business, and I started to talk to his friends also who were in accounting firms, auditing firms. And I said, does it really make sense that I know the passwords to every system I've ever built? You know, what can we do about that? And then I actually went into Citigroup, where I started in IT audit to learn more about security. And I started hacking because I was a math and computer major, and I really had an interest in security at that time. I'm not a risk taker in general, so I always thought about my physical security risk, and even back then, the things that I was using that could create a risk to either the business I was in or to our family.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at Citi, we started to see the first hackers, right? They were kids. But, you know, part of me knew this would evolve, right? We had lots of cases where people were attempting, through, check fraud and all types of things. And then it evolved into one of the biggest cases of all time at that time, which was a Russian hacker case against the Citi system.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first experience with criminals who were attacking our systems as opposed to college kids.
Right.
So, I think that set my stage where I knew that I wanted to work not only within the bank but within the community in and the financial services in identifying what are the threats and how do we protect against them, right? And of course, putting away the bad guys, which was exciting. I don't get to do that so much now. We don't have those kind of cases where I currently work. But for anybody who's in this field, I think we know that basically we don't sleep. So wherever you are, if it's very exciting, it means there's a lot of activity going on. And you're up all hours of the day trying to combat these threats.
Great. So going back a few years and looking at the differences between when you first got started and Steve Katz became the first official CISO.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest changes? What do you see as having really moved fast well, and what do you see as, you know, still lagging behind?
So, you know, what we find is that criminals and nation states now have really advanced. Um, what we thought about early on is we could lock them out, right? Just put all the protection you can, you could lock them out. And we realized over time that applying all our attention to protection was just not enough. Because if they're advanced enough, and you know, I wrote a story for new joiners, which is just imagine a room full of North Koreans, 1,000 North Koreans, and their only job is to break into your firm. Doesn't matter what protection you have, they're going to get in. So where we started looking at protection, we said, we have to also detect if they're trying to get in. So evolve step by step. And then it's okay, they're going to get in. It's the industry kind of awakened and said, we have to know how to respond to that. So it's been an evolution. The evolution right now is since the introduction of, you know, various cryptoware, and we've had companies that have been crippled by ransomware, right? So Maersk is a famous story there. We said, okay, not only do we have to protect, detect, and respond, we have to know how to recover if our systems one day, you know, we get hit by a ransomware and then within 20 minutes, everybody's on pencil and paper. And that's if you could even find paper anymore, right? So, and those were the stories we were hearing. So that evolution, it really takes us through the NIST framework, which is excellent to use. But where I see us now is evolving to be able to, what are our golden sources of data? What are our systems? Where are the keys to the kingdom? And how do we lock them into a vault so that if everything else fails, we can come back up and running?
Right.
And you look at it not just as your company. So I'm in financial services. And what we're worried about is the financial services industry has to survive, right? So you have to partner with other firms and talk about those measures. If there is an attack, let's say, against the financial system, they're doing the same thing in energy. What if there's an attack against the energy sector, which attempts are happening all the time in both sectors, right? And we really have to cooperate together. So over time, I've seen that evolution. I've seen really in the last 10 years, a concerted effort by the private sector to work with law enforcement together, right? And for law enforcement to collaborate across the world to try to get, you know, bad websites taken down, criminal actors taken down, really to protect all of us, if you will. So the scary things for me, I have a good friend that's a CISO in an energy company. So where I'm worried about money being stolen from the bank or the financial sector and the markets, what my friend is seeing are attacks against the energy sector where they're trying to take down the grid. So those of us
Right.
who experienced in New York after 9/11, we saw a mistake happened and the grid went down and we all thought it was an attack, right? So I was on a conference call and the whole East Coast started going black and everything started ending. And that was, even though that was an attack, it was an indication of what could happen, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned talking about protecting the crown jewels and understanding cyber is a business issue today. versus in the past where we were simply looking at it as trying to get a lot of different layered tools and make sure that the perimeter was secure, and understanding now that that's a fallacy, that there's no such thing, and that they're already inside your network, and there's so many different ways that they're coming into your organization through third parties, through interconnected systems. So what do you see as with ransomware obviously being something very concerning, what are the biggest risks that you see right now today in your job?
So, I mean, I'll tell you the biggest threats we worry about, and that translates to risk. So over the last, I'd say about 3 quarters, we've been seeing attacks on the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So vendors that we use, we've been seeing them attacked, and it's not isolated. It's clear that they're trying to get information of the vendors' clients, and they're trying to breach into systems. So way back when, so not so many years ago, but the Home Depot breach was through their HVAC, the heating and ventilation vendor, right? When we looked at vendor management, we assessed vendors who had our data, right? Who were the people that had our data? Who had direct access? We were looking at business vendors. We weren't looking at the people who were checking to make sure the temperature was okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that all of these cases, monumental cases that have happened, have kind of changed the industry. So all of a sudden, you had to look at every single vendor that could touch your system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at that, recently we've seen some of the big IT vendors that are attached. So typically the vendors that you would outsource to, right? So they're getting people are getting your source code, and who knows what else is there. They're certainly trying to get into systems. We're seeing vendors attack that have client data. We saw several years ago law firms attacked that the information they had was material non-public information, if you will. So that
Mm-hmm.
information was being used by criminals to then go trade in the stock market. So we're seeing the interrelationship. What we're seeing are honestly very smart people who have criminal organizations. And when I say organizations, we actually had a map of an organization that had hundreds of people working for this criminal organization, all having different jobs, right? So there's the head of the organization, then there's people who are developing the hacks, there's people who are doing the cyber threat intelligence, all the research to see how they can get in, right? Then there's people who are actually breaking in, and then you have money mules who are going to take money out from the
Mm-hmm.
various accounts. So again, very big organizations, organized crime for a reason. And I thought about what are the parallels between physical crime and what we're seeing today. And today you just could have a vast global network of people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
So our vendor committee just kicked off, speaking of vendors, and we're now in the process of putting together that program. And there's been a lot of research already done on that by me over the past 2 years. And one of the things that we've seen evolve over the past year has been the Department of Defense has decided that there's no longer this trust mentality. It's going to be a trust and verify mentality. And so they've put together a program called the CMMC, which is a Cybersecurity Maturity Model capability. And what they're basically saying is that they're going to have a third-party auditor come in and actually assess the vendor's level of maturity, and they're going to be rated on a scale of 0 to 5. And if they're not a 3, 4, or 5, they can't even bid on DoD work. And there's about 300,000 of these different contractors all over the globe. So I'm seeing this more of a concerted understanding that it's not enough to just check a box and say, yeah, you've got this, you've got that.
Yeah.
Because you're really saying, okay, I trust you to tell us the truth. And most people simply will not do that. So what's happening is there's a shift. So how do you see this evolving perhaps in the private sector? Because I have two kinds of ways that things typically evolve. One is from Wall Street and finance, and that's from a technology and a security perspective. But I also see the other one from a government perspective as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think we have to evolve to that also. We already, in my firm, we already have clients asking to do audits, to do just that, right? We see it, and it's difficult. We don't allow that. We don't allow people to come in and people want to come in and walk into your data center. Really, what are you going to see in my data center, right? You're just coming in to check whether it's got air conditioning, the sprinklers, and whether it has no windows. But we don't allow things like that. But in order for us to be able to trust, right, it is something difficult, because it's not only that you have to trust their security, you have to trust all of their employees. I mean, we've seen cases where there are insiders, either in a company or in the vendor, who are just there to do something malicious, right? So they're trying to steal data, and that's the reason why they got hired in the first place, if you will. They were planted there. So how do we do that trust? Can we trust our third parties? Can we trust external auditors to look at it? My feeling, and whether this will happen or not, is we have to reduce the number of vendors we use to the trust, if we can, right? So that when you find a vendor you trust that can do multiple things, that is keeping up with security, to try to go to those strategic vendors. So it's
that kind of
impossible.
Also,
yeah, we have thousands and thousands of vendors that supply financial services, right? It's difficult to check all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads me into another thought process around cybersecurity tools. So, we have many layered tools. We have different categories, layered tools, more than a dozen. And within each of those different sets of tools, we have 40, 50 plus vendors in some cases. So many companies are using different tools that are getting very difficult to manage from an orchestration perspective. So we're seeing a lot of need to reduce the vendors in that respect as well. So that's sort of playing into the whole mindset of vendor security and vendor risk. So sort of to go 180 degrees in another direction, I can definitely empathize with this question. So what are some of the challenges that you see being a woman in cybersecurity?
That's a good question. So many times in my career, I've been the only woman at the table, and it's difficult. And I could tell this with my husband. He doesn't always hear my voice, right? He's watching a game, he's doing something else. My son will say something, he'll hear him, I say something, it's just not heard. And it's the same way in the boardroom. A lot of times the woman's voice is not heard. If there are other women at the table, they will hear their voice, but men, what we found is that men they're not tuned in that way. And so a woman will say a good idea, nobody will acknowledge it. And a man says it 5 minutes later, and everybody says, great idea. So, I mean, I have seen that. I've seen that when I've said things. I've seen that when other female colleagues have said it. And very interesting. I'm interviewing for a junior position on my team, and I interviewed a young woman yesterday. And I asked her what her challenge was, and she says she's on the phone, right now with a lot of different men. She works with attorneys, and they never hear her voice. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how loud she has to speak, but they don't hear her voice. So I was surprised to hear that it's still happening today with the younger generation, but it is. So as a woman, there's been, a fine balance between being heard and, excuse my language, or being seen as a bitch, right? So men can raise their voice, but if a woman does it, it's, hands off. She's having a bad day, but it's still difficult for us to get through. When I actually did an interview for a company, was writing an article last year, just how do women still have a problem getting through the glass ceiling? And they said, what do you recommend? How can we train women to be able to become these leaders and to feel confident? I said, do me a favor, train the men. So let's figure out that. So, excuse me on the men, but we still have that problem. We still have it. So I have personally worked with women who made it to the top. Many of them were very unpleasant. I have to admit that. So it's hard to because they battled so much. They did take on that bitchy persona where they actually were screaming at people constantly. And I will never be that kind of person, right? So,
Mhm.
so how do you do it? And I want to be able to encourage young women to feel comfortable at that table, right? So,
Right. Yeah, thank you. So just some statistics for everyone. So in terms of female board members right now, about 17% of the board are female. And in terms of technical entrepreneurs, 4% are female who get invested in. So there's a lot of diversity programs that are starting to kick up. I'm seeing that people want more 50-50 management. I'm seeing people want more 50-50 boards, which is great. I was interviewed for a dissertation from a grad student for the University of Leeds, and her um, dissertation was on the New Girl Network, an investigation into how female technology entrepreneurs network in a digital age. I still find it very hard to be heard as well, or be taken seriously, frankly. And so I'm just think that one of the ways that would be probably best is to have this, mentality of diversity from day one, that it has to be somewhat 50-50. And how do we engage the C-suite and the board to support that? Yeah, Urs, thank you. Urs is a board member at a bank in New Jersey, I believe it is. And, how do we get that kind of science, technology, education, math going for the young women so that they know that we can do these jobs too, and that we are needed, and we're needed just as much as the guys. So this is really great.
yeah,
And hopefully we'll see changes. And I know all you guys who are on this call are definitely supporters of us. So we are thrilled to have you in our corners, and we
yeah.
thank you for that. So how do you see at the board level and at the executive level people starting to absorb cybersecurity from the business perspective or not? What do you think some of the lessons learned are that you see when you try to communicate with the decision makers about budgeting and resourcing, and how do we get them to up the bar, so to speak, so that we can get what we really need, because we are very woefully under budgeted, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah. So the board, the boards have been paying attention to cyber since the media is helping us with that, right? So it scares them half to death when they see that a company was infiltrated, that all of their data is now on the internet being sold on the dark web.
Mhm.
Um, in certain industries, obviously they were hit sooner than others. So financial services boards obviously had to pay attention sooner, especially with criminal cases. So when the Bank of Bangladesh was hacked using their SWIFT network, and millions and millions of dollars went out the door, banks are paying attention. So not only could their data be gone, but their money could be gone. Banks in other industries, sorry, boards in other industries also need to pay attention. So I do see education for boards of directors in cybersecurity. I do see reach outs for boards trying to, if they can't get somebody with cyber experience on the board, at least getting a guest board member or a speaker, because
Mhm.
they're very concerned. We've had questions. We have various boards in our bank, and we've had questions. Are they personally liable? What do they personally have to do?
Mhm.
People are very nervous, and they have to not only ask the right questions, but they really have to understand the answer.
Right.
And the board obviously is empowered to say you need to fix this. They have to really say, what is our cyber risk? What can it do to the firm, and what are you doing about it?
Mhm.
Something we've done, which is The boards have really appreciated that. We have done cyber exercising with them so they could see first,
Mhm.
a simulation of there's a cyber attack and what decisions have to be made. It gives them comfort, first of all, that management knows what to do, right? And then we
Right.
could do something quickly, but it also gives them an education on all the various aspects that may be involved in the decisions that have to be made very quickly
Mhm. Yeah.
if there's a potential cyber attack. So I think boards, definitely have to be scared of this. A cyber attack can again come from the from the outside, but we can also see an attack that has similar effects coming from an insider, right? So
Sure.
we view them in that insider threat is still a risk. It's somebody who can take down your network from the inside or exfiltrate your data from the inside as well.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I mean, boards have a responsibility to really understand the protection and to really, you know, mandate that the firm do something about it. Yeah.
Mhm. And when I did the research 3.5 years ago, and I interviewed the Fortune 1000 in the cyber insurance industry at the board level to understand what the problems were, a lot of times I was told, well, the CISO walks in with a list of 300 vulnerabilities and they look at it and they're mystified. They don't know what a man-in-the-middle attack is or a SQL injection.
Yeah.
So the terminology that we use with the board has to be business oriented. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book and created the course, was because I understood that we are disconnected completely and we've got to
Yeah.
connect them. And it's interesting too, in a case just this week where a bunch of board members over in Europe had decided that they wanted to have some type of monitoring done on their executives. So one of the ways we look at it is from the deep and the dark web perspective. And they're like, oh, we just want these 20 people. And it's like, you don't understand that you have to have your whole email domain monitored, right? It's like they just don't get it. They think, oh, just these 20 people. It's like, no, 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 no. It's like you
Yeah.
have to have the entire organization monitored, because if they get into your secretary, they're going to get into you, right? And so there's a lot of education that we have
Yeah.
to do that just, we've got to get through to them.
There's a
It
lot.
should.
Yeah, there's a lot of education. There's a lot of vectors. So we fish our executive secretaries, right, or
Mhm.
executive assistants because it's easier to get to them, right? Because they're
Sure.
supposed to open all the mail, click on all the
Mhm.
attachments before they,
Mhm.
give it to the boss. So, ethical fishing is definitely important, but it's education at all levels, right? So
Exactly.
it's so we also did something similar where we looked at the footprint of some of our boards of directors, right? When they saw
Mhm.
what was out there, if somebody was trying to do research on them to analyze how to attack them, there is so much information about those leaders out there. So executive
Mhm.
management and boards of directors, and it's when they see the reports, it's frightening, right?
Mhm.
I didn't know that
Right.
information was out there, and how do you get rid of it? So,
Mhm. And one of the things in the enterprise cybersecurity course that we focus on at the very end is board reporting, and what are the metrics that would be useful for the board in terms of being able to go back to them and show them how they protect the digital assets, what the vendor program looks
yeah,
like, what the insurance needs to look like, and if they're doing an M&A activities, what does that need to look like? Because their purview is a higher level, but at the end of the day, they're the ones making the decisions about the amount of money that you're going to get and how you're going to be able to use that money to go
yeah.
back and increase the resources or get better cybersecurity tools and programs in place. And so it is really where we want to be speaking to everyone on this call about, because this is the key, ladies and gentlemen, to getting change is the decision makers, that we have to get through to them. And the only way we can get through to them is like what Gail said, let's go in and show them what it really is like, because they really don't know. They see what they see on TV, but they really have no genuine appreciation for what it would be like to have a ransomware attack or to have some type of other data exfiltration, data breach, and how many different things have to be done by all the people in the organization, not just the cyber team, your attorneys and your incident response people and you name it, right? How does the communication work? These are real issues. And the more that we can get the board members involved, even if it's just to get them to understand very high level things, I think we're going to make progress. So,
Yeah. One thing I find that boards are interested in is, okay, so those are our metrics, and you say we need these improvements. How do we look compared to our peers? So
mhm,
they always want to know, are our competitors doing better at this than we are? And
right.
so there are firms that obviously do that, do this benchmarking.
Mhm,
There are, if you participate in a survey, then you get the results. And a lot of it comes also with interviews, and we participated, and that also gets a message across. If
mhm,
you say, okay, we need X amount of dollars because we're weak here, here, and here, but at our
right.
competitors, they've already got that, so security not only protects the firm, but it's also a selling point, right? If
Mhm,
you're a firm that's a vendor to other parties, you want to have that sticker that says I'm secure, right? Some type of certificate, and you want to make your customer shareholders, everybody feel comfortable. So
right. One of the things I also see that kind of relates to that is that the fact that we can actually look across industries and we can rank them in terms of cybersecurity maturity. Financial services is the most mature. Education, unfortunately, is the least mature. It's
yeah,
like, so how is that, how do I relate, how do I look in terms of my peers? I always found that to be an annoying question personally, because it's the first thing that they'll ask the lawyers, and the lawyers will give them advice. And unfortunately, and no offense to any lawyers on the call, but the thing that I found out is that most lawyers don't even know what kind of digital assets they have. Last company we were in a few months ago, basically, a lawyer told me, no, we don't have to be HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant because we don't have credit card data or healthcare data. I was like, and I didn't correct her in
yeah,
front of the board of directors. I know better. But later on, when I presented my materials, she understood that she was wrong. So it's like, we really need to get those people understanding that, this is the type of data that you have, and this is the type of regulations that you have to adhere to. And these are the exposures that you have. And we need to get them more involved.
yeah.
So okay, we got about 6 more minutes left, and then we're going to open up for questions. What does the future of operational cyber risk management look like to you? Where do you see this heading towards? What do you think some of the things that we don't have in place today that we need in place, or that we're starting to see other organizations put in place? What does that look like?
So again, one of the things that worries me is the cyber resilience aspect. So obviously regulations are starting to come out in various countries, but it's the resilience of our whole infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So not just financial infrastructure, but energy sector and telecom, all of the critical services that we need as a society to operate. And that does worry me, especially with the state of affairs in politics, right? So we're seeing attacks by nation states to try to cripple various things. Certainly that could happen in the countries where we live in as well. So when you look at operational risk, it's not just looking within your walls, it's not just considering what controls you need to have in place. From the cyber perspective, you have to really consider what partners do you rely on, in what regions do you operate on, and where could that create a risk. But it's having that global picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, your key business partners, your key vendors, any of them could be attacked and could be a single point of failure for you, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And one of the things that has been being spoken about, Richard A. Clarke's book, The Fifth Domain, I don't know if anyone read it, um, looks at, the NIST cybersecurity framework, but what he does is he replaces recover with resiliency. And I really like that, because what that he's saying is, not only do we recover, but we come back stronger, better, we know more,
yeah,
we're in a better position than we were before the data breach, right? Or whatever cybersecurity incident that you had. So the idea of resiliency is something that we're teaching to the students as well. We're trying to teach them how to benchmark it actually. How do you know what the resiliency of those digital assets are? Because that's what they attack. So that's what has to be resilient, right? It's not just the organization, it's the asset itself. So we're looking at it from that perspective. And I think that the NIST will evolve to be the 3 R's at the end of the day, which will be, respond,
Yeah,
recover, and resiliency. And
it
how
has
do
to
we
be.
yeah, it has to be, right? Because
Yeah.
we have to raise the bar. We have to keep raising the bar. And this is where, the education part comes in again, because if we are showing people how to measure resiliency, then they actually can have a number, a metric that they can go back and look across the entire digital asset infrastructure and say, okay, here's my crown jewels. These are what they look like from a resiliency perspective and an exposure perspective. And I can actually put together a plan that has some type of a common sense approach to how I'm going to secure various aspects of my organization.
But
We can't.
I recently heard that Netflix has implemented a program of self-healing apps. So they build the apps to be resilient from the get-go. And they go through and they knock out the app, attack the apps and knock it down. So how do we all build that, right? Self-healing, that if this app is taken out, something else can come up in its place. So something we're thinking about on how
That
to
is
get healthier.
amazing.
Yeah,
Wow, I didn't know that. That is great.
yeah, yeah.
How smart are they? Good for them.
No, good.
Wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm sure they're attacked all the time. Obviously, they're attacked all the time. Yeah. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So
Um,
the other thing with the resiliency is, again, it's not just an IT problem, because when we're talking to our business partners about it, we're like, you have no IT for 2 days. What are you going to be doing, right? How is your business
exactly.
going to keep running? What do you have, either in paper or somewhere else that you can access it in order to keep things going? So,
Hmm. Exactly. So when I take a look at some of these questions, and we can go into a few questions. So let me just scroll up. So Ursa's asking, what type of information and stats do you see being provided to the board today? And are the boards actually being involved in tabletop cyber breach exercises?
so second part is yes, they're being involved in those exercises. As far as metrics, I don't think we have, anybody has come up with the perfect way to communicate to the board, numbers or seas of reds, greens, and yellows. Um, I do see things like, obviously, the number of incidents, the number of breaches that are important for the board to be aware of. But the other thing that they see are also the number of audit findings or regulatory findings or things like that.
Mhm.
What I think is important to show is how much protection you have in place and how many attacks you stopped. So for years, we've been reporting just the few things maybe that got through to the board.
Mhm.
We never told them, I get attacked 7,000 times a day, you know, and I'm not talking about my
Yeah.
firm, obviously, but these are all the things we stopped. And this little thing that got in, they couldn't do anything because of all our layered defenses. So those types of things, I think, would be very eye-opening to the board.
Mhm.
So the other thing, I think it's important for the board to understand when there's a big media case of somebody that was hacked. So excuse me if anybody's on from Capital One, but to explain to the board, how did it happen to them?
Mhm.
In terms they could understand, and can it happen to us? And
Right.
these are the things we have in place. So we've
Right.
have found these real life examples of, very significant attacks over the years, really hit home with the boards.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, that's a really great point. And just for the audience, all of our students do case studies on data breaches and different cybersecurity incidents. So if there's something specifically that someone wants to know about who's on the call, we already have these type of case studies. They're in PowerPoint, and if you're interested in those, we can, get you access to them if that's something that will help you on the call. In terms of stats, just to throw out a couple things here, the last board meeting that I attended that I presented the cybersecurity program on, one of the things that we reported on was something called hidden exposures, where we had billions of dollars worth of exposures in systems where they had 35 million records in databases because the business unit thought for some reason that they needed to have their fingers on these records. And to go back to the business and explain that, no, you can archive these offline and they're out of line of sight of the attacker. And then your exposure is reduced because you're not going to have to notify 35 million people. You're going to have to notify 200,000 people, which is a huge difference, right? So the level of understanding at the board, these kind of statistics I found to be very useful, as well as getting them to understand like what their ransomware strategy should be, like who they need to be on call and how they work through the cost benefit analysis of paying a ransom or restoring their systems. Is another thing that I found very beneficial to them. And for all you on the call, there's a ransomware panel next week, which you don't want to miss. It's going to be good. Going to have experts in the insurance industry as well as the financial services industry, the legal side of it, et cetera, and the forensic side of it, of course. All right, let's go to another question here. Okay, Dave Niv, shout out to you. He wants man in the middle changed to woman in the middle. That's
Good.
great. Okay. Joe, to Gail's point about how we are doing with our peers, Steve Katz talked about the collaboration and information sharing that he participated in with his peers at other banks for the good of the cybersecurity of all rising tide. Does this information sharing still happen, or has it disappeared? Like, what's happening with that?
It's intensified, so it happens all the time. So it's still happening. We agreed early on, it was probably Steve who first said it, that we're not competing on security, right? So there are no secrets. We have to share with each other what we're doing, what we're seeing, because an attack against one bank can affect all of us, right? So that sharing happens at all different levels. We have many, actually too many, because you can't go to all of them. Many organizations that are set up just for that. So yes, there's usually a speaker rather, but the most beneficial thing out of those are the quiet talks that you have with your peers. So you talk about, again, cyber trends, threat trends, even things like, the best way to do something from a control perspective that's not necessarily cyber related, but it does happen. The CISOs still meet with each other. And again, cyber threat intelligence has morphed. So it's not just banks, cyber threat intelligence talking to each other, but there's organizations that are comprised of law enforcement and threat intelligence and fraud investigators in firms that are very successful.
Mm-hmm. Good to hear.
Yeah.
So Kevin has a question. How important do you believe mobile security is as part of the enterprise security strategy, particularly with the increase in the work from home initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to trust what you're working on. So it's I think, the world went to working at home overnight, and some companies were not prepared for that at all. People weren't working for a couple of weeks while they tried to figure out how to get mobilized. Global companies where people traveled a lot usually had that figured out. We had it figured out, but you have to understand for sure that the bad guy isn't coming in to your network with the employees. So, single factor authentication just has to go away. We have to ensure that we have trusted multi-factor authentication for any networks that are critical. And I'd say that's any company at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Niv is saying, when dealing with cyber attacks that seem to originate by international cybercrime groups or nation states, North Korea and so on, can you get some kind of assistance from the government? Do you need to report it to someone in the government?
Yeah. So, yes. So what we've come to believe is the government can actually help you. So, and they're your friend. They're not going to turn you in. When you call in the FBI, for example, to help on a case, they can tell you, we've seen that before. So they're making it look like they're doing a denial of service attack, but actually go look at your systems, your payment systems, because they're stealing money. So they're diverting your attention somewhere else. Um, the FBI, particularly, I interact with them quite a bit, have seen a lot of cases like that where they see similarities in the attack. They can help you identify your impacted assets quicker, your signature. So, again, if it's an advanced attack, you're seeing what the attackers want you to see. You
Right.
have to be able to find what they don't want you to see. So it definitely can help you. So they may not take your case depending on what it is, but they certainly will give you advice.
Good to know. Joe is asking, what questions, if any, is the board asking about security in the pandemic world, given a newly formed remote workforce and nascent attacks focused on leveraging concerns around COVID?
They're asking everything. So, how do how do we know the workforce is secure? They're asking things like, can people print at home? What's happening with the paper, right? Can people eavesdrop? They are very concerned. So it's again getting out there in front, explaining what the security is, how we're protected, so they understand and they feel more comfortable with the company. But it's not only the boards, senior managers, it's regulators. Everybody wants to know because it's very scary. So nobody ever imagined that the whole workforce would be at home. And
None of us did.
no.
No.
But
From
for me, I'm having family dinners, which
That's
maybe it
right.
was once when my son was young, and the teacher had to make a card. So I think he was like 2 or 3. Name something special that your mommy does. She has dinner with us once in a while, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, so now dinner all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. From Janelle, does the board evaluate the true business interruption exposure as part of the discussions on cybersecurity strategies and response, risk management, spend, post-event recovery, et cetera?
Does the board evaluate?
The
Say
business
again, sorry.
interruption exposure as part of the discussions they're having on the strategy in terms of the response and their risk management.
I think it's an area that still needs improvement. So as the boards were always comfortable with business continuity management. You had a data center over there. Something happens to this data center, hurricane, flood, whatever it is, outage, you can move to the other data center. Part of the dialogue is explaining to them what's the difference between a BCM event and a cyber event, right? Why doesn't the same solution work? How is it that we can take out both our primary and our secondary backup systems? And so they have to understand that. We do have to talk to them about what could the business outage mean in terms of dollars and cents, right? And
Yeah, makes a lot of
and
sense.
and to have them understand what's the impact tolerance. So how long could the business be out before there's
Right,
a severe impact? Yeah.
exactly.
So I think those dialogues still have to evolve. Again, some cases that happen not in the financial industry, but where other um, industries were taken out and impacted. And so the way they were impacted originally was because Russia was doing a nation state attack against the Ukraine. And then anybody who had a business in Ukraine, it was a supply chain attack, right? I don't know if
The
you're all familiar with that
non-Petya
massive
attack.
non-Petya attack. But so if you were doing business in Ukraine, you were mandated to use this type of accounting software. And so Russia attacked the accounting software, made sure there was an update, and that update had malware in it that was crippling. And it spread across the world. So for firms who were global firms, and it was interconnected. So again, the boards have to understand what that case is. The boards have to understand that you could be out. If you don't take precautions, you could be out of business for 2 weeks. And for certain industries, you're out for 2 weeks, you're just out, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
One of our students just did the case study on Mondelez, which was a result of the non-Petch attack, and they lost $10 billion.
Yeah.
They were one of the lucky ones. Most companies lost more than that. One of the things that we're teaching the students in the class is how to have that ransomware strategy, what we call that ransomware recovery time objective, the point from encryption to decryption. What is it for you? How do you figure it out? Because that is going to make a difference in how quickly you can recover from this, or are you going to pay the ransom because you don't have the time to recover from it? There's so many aspects of this that the board has to get involved in to really understand, like, okay, well, what are my costs to recover? Can I really recover? What confidence level do I have in it? What should my cyber extortion sublimit be on my insurance policy? Because I'm going to want to go back and claim that, even though Mondelez is now struggling to claim that because non-Petya was declared an act of war and Zurich and all the other carriers don't want to pay. So these are very interesting conversations that are going to happen next week as well around this whole interruption aspect of cybersecurity. And we need to be very clear on what this all means to us.
I really, at the board level, I really think they need kind of like a deep dive once a year, right? So not just a half-hour update every now and then, but a deep dive so that they could really understand what is the cyber threat, how has it evolved in a year, because it evolves every year. Every year there's a new threat that we didn't think about the year before.
Exactly. And then to just, even the case studies, if they could get a case study a month that they could just look at and start to chew on a little bit. And it's all in business language, right? One of the things that we are offering, for those of you in the phone who don't know, is the executive course. That's just for your board members to talk about these stats and to talk about these things that they want to ask about ransomware attacks and, the work from home situation and you name it. So just putting a plug out there for us, of course. Sorry about that. Let's see. Are you seeing insurance, this is from Sean, are you seeing insurance carriers establish stricter requirements for large enterprises before they'll issue any type of cyber coverage?
We are seeing that. So when cyber coverage first started to exist, the insurance companies didn't even know what it meant and what they could possibly be liable for. So we are seeing something, it depends when you shop around, but we are seeing that certain requirements be met. It's the same thing. So, when you have a banking relationship with your institution, they will cover you if it's not your fault. If you do something stupid and give somebody your, passwords to get into your online account and they take over that account, why should they cover you when you lose, $100,000 or whatever you might have, $5? But but you have to take some responsibility. So insurance companies have to see that, right? There has to be a minimum level because they just can't cover you if you have not taking any security precautions. So fine line.
Right. And if you're willfully neglectful, they shouldn't be covering you either. I mean,
Correct.
One of the issues that we saw with Equifax was that TransUnion and I forget the name of the other credit rating agency, Experian, they both patched that Apache Struts vulnerability.
Right.
And these guys didn't. And that was one of the reasons why they gotten the deep doo-doo that they got. They've lost over $5 billion+ over the last several years. I'm surprised they're still alive, frankly.
I didn't think they'd survive that either, honestly.
I honestly don't. I think the government should have done something, but that's my personal opinion. Okay. Earth asks, you mentioned eavesdropping from Alexa and other types of technologies. What guidance are you giving your colleagues at UBS about this?
Turn them off before you get on a call. Yeah. Something we were concerned about from the get-go. Make sure all those devices are off. Can we enforce that? So there are things we can't enforce. We really do have to trust the workforce to be sensible and do the right thing, right? So educating, so not just the boards, educating the workforce. We've done some fun education, right? Which because you can't get their attention. You have to get their attention. We made jokes and did some videos of people being taken advantage of by cyber criminals, but they really are your first line of defense. When you look at the number of attacks that happened because one employee clicked on a phishing email. We're spending millions of dollars and one employee can click and, and that's it. So they have to be educated too.
Yeah, exactly. So one last question from Nick. Have you made use of any young interns within your team, and have you seen them excited about cybersecurity and want to make a career out of it?
Absolutely. So doing that, we have a couple of interns right now. I'm looking at some others. You know, we like to get kids. Kids are very excited about the cyber aspect. One thing that we have to introduce them to, it's not all catch the bad guys. It's not all looking at the forensics, but this bigger picture of how it impacts the business. That's something they're not learning. What we're seeing from the kids who are coming, they're just all technical geeks. But to understand the full picture and how it could, you know, end up impacting the survivability of a business is very important. So yeah, we definitely hire kids.
Yeah, good. And for everybody on the phone, PACE is looking for you to provide internships to their students if you so desire. And if that's something that interests you, please let me know, because I will connect you with the right people at PACE so that you can take it from there. And the students are wonderful. It's a great cybersecurity program, as you all know. And we'll be happy to, you know, make that, broker that introduction. Okay, I have 1 minute left. Any last questions? Let me see if I got everybody. Looks like I got everybody. Okay, great. So
Thank you.
Gail, it was amazing. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed listening to you. I'm sure everyone else did. We didn't have a single person leave the call. This will be available online for those of you who want to share it with your colleagues and peers. And Julie will be providing you with that information later on. We hope to all see you next week on the ransomware panel. And of course, we have an advisory board meeting coming up on, I think it's the 14th of July. Yeah. And again, Gail, thank you again.
Thank you.
That was really, really great.
All right.
And everybody have a great 4th of July. Be safe, and we'll see you on the next one. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.